Let's talk now about special considerations when it comes to um, macros and fat. So, a couple important things to keep in mind. So, like I've mentioned many times, when you are incorporating or calculating your healthy fat amounts for each meal, remember to include the amount from the quality protein. So if you're cooking up 8 ounces of 85/15 ground beef, there's going to be quite a bit of healthy fat in there. So remember to include that in your calculations. Otherwise, you're going to be going way over your daily fat allotment if you just add oil, but without taking that other fat into account. Second thing to keep in mind is that cooking in general. So this is where, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and don't try to be, unless your sport or lifestyle requires it, don't try to be a macro wizard where you have to like tabulate every little thing. But look, when you're cooking something, some fat's going to drip out. So if you're roasting some ground beef, some fat's going to render out. If you're if you're cooking bacon in the oven, some fat's going to render out. If you're sauteing something in oil, not all of the oil that you put in the pan is going to go into the actual food that you're cooking. So do your best to calculate, to guesstimate. If I'm sauteing some kale and I put a tablespoon of ghee in, I'm going to count that as a tablespoon of ghee, even though there's some still left on the pan. So don't be weird. Don't be that person who like measures out all these little things. Like, it'll be okay. But just remember that when you're cooking stuff, this is going to have just a little bit of a fluctuation depending on how much is actually rendered out, absorbed, utilized, all these different things. How do you utilize healthy fats? So people, instinctively get, well, okay, protein is going to be my ground beef, or carbs are going to be my sweet potatoes and kale, things like that, or white rice. But what way do I incorporate fat, which is mostly going to be those oils again, right? So these are either things that you can cook with. So you can put a tablespoon in a saute pan to cook up your kale. Most of the stuff I roast, I put a couple tablespoons of avocado oil or olive oil on it, and then kind of mix it around. That's one way, and probably the primary way you're going to do it if you're cooking stuff. Another way is to drizzle it on food. So if you've got a salad or you've got some dressings, maybe some Primal Kitchen dressings or some Tessemaes or something like that, you can use their avocado oil ranches, for example, or some regular olive oil or avocado oil to drizzle on food. So that's going to be another way that you can get your healthy fat. So remember, there are a couple different ways to incorporate it. You can also get it from the dry fats, like we mentioned last time, where you can, just take these portably, but for most people, these would be the two main ways. And then lastly, remember that this is going to be for most people, for a normal, physiologically functioning human being. Generally speaking, there are some exceptions, yes, like, the Katavans and others, but generally speaking, fats are going to be the main source of energy for your body. At most, your body can store a few thousand calories of glucose, whereas it can store a couple 100,000 calories of fat. So when push comes to shove, fat is the main energy source of your body. And it's not that carbs can't be utilized for certain things, or not that they're certainly necessary for certain bodily processes, but generally speaking, fat is going to be your main fuel source, which is why it's making up a decent amount of the calories, generally speaking, of what you're going to be consuming. But that being said, for certain sports, for certain things, athletics, whether it's high-intensity CrossFit or MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, things that tap into that more glycolytic pathway, and glycolytic just meaning sort of utilizing carbs more. We're talking things like a minute to 10 minutes of high intensity activity. It could be longer than that, presumably, but we're talking go, really intense activity. We're not talking a marathon, we're not talking biking. In fact, most endurance athletes now are actually coming around to the idea of keto or higher fat, lower carb, because they realize, most of these activities are aerobic and do not require the use of excess carbohydrates to get to where you need to go. So while it's true that for some athletic endeavors like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and others, you may need a higher carb amount. Generally speaking, it's not. And I should mention there that yes, there are some exceptions out there. There are people who do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or MMA or high-level CrossFit who are doing keto. You know, they're the exceptions to the rule, right? Rich Froning eats peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Probably doesn't mean you can eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or that I can eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So just remember, you know, these are, what I'm talking about in these videos are broad and general rules that are good places to start, and then you can find out what works for you. So to review, special considerations when it comes to fat. You want to remember to include any fat that's coming from your quality protein. If you enter this into MyFitnessPal, it will automatically calculate it. Remember that when cooking, there's going to be some discrepancy between the actual amount and the real amount, but just do the best you can. How to utilize these fats: you want to cook with them, you want to drizzle on food. Those are, you know, kind of really the two main ways. You can also have them as dry fats. And then remember that fats are going to be your main source of energy for the vast majority of activities that are not very taxing on the body, walking around, moving, you know, doing general things. Fat is going to be your main fuel source, and then carbs are more for high intensity athletics. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.